Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, good morning. My name is David Graham, and I'm pleased to come before you today to speak about Vioxx, heart attacks, and the FDA. By way of introduction, I graduated from Johns Hopkins School of Medicine and trained clinically in medicine and neurology. I completed a fellowship in epidemiology and a master's in public health, and for the past 20 years I have worked in the field of drug safety and am currently the Associate Director for Science and Medicine in the FDA's Office of Drug Safety. During my career, I believe that I have made a beneficial difference for the cause of patient safety. My work led to the withdrawal from the U.S. market of Omniflox, Resulin, Fen-Phenin Redux, and phenylpropanolamine, the outpatient withdrawal of Trovan, and contributed to the withdrawal of Lotronex, Baycol, Seldane, and Propulsid. Over my career, I have recommended the market withdrawal of 12 drugs. Only 2 of these remain on the market today. Prior to approval of Vioxx, a study that was performed by Merck named 090, which found a nearly 7-fold increase in heart attack risk with low-dose Vioxx. The labeling at approval said nothing about these heart attack risks. In November 2000, another Merck trial named Vigor found a 5-fold increase in heart attack risk with the high-dose form of Vioxx. About 18 months after the Vigor results were published, FDA made a labeling change about heart attack risk, but it did not place these in the warning section of the labeling. Also, it did not ban the high-dose formulation and its use. I believe such a ban should have been implemented. Of note, the label change that FDA made had absolutely no effect on how often high-dose Vioxx was prescribed, so I ask, what good did it achieve? In March 2004, another epidemiology study reported that both high and low-dose Vioxx increased heart attack risks compared to Celebrex, Vioxx's leading competitor. Our study found similar results. A study report describing our work was put on the FDA website. This report estimated that nearly 28,000 excess cases of heart attack and sudden cardiac death had been caused by Vioxx. I must emphasize to the committee that this is an extremely conservative estimate. FDA always claims that randomized clinical trials provide the best data. If you apply the risk levels seen in the 2 Merck clinical trials, Vigor and Approve, you obtain a more realistic and likely range of estimates for the number of excess cases. This estimate ranges from 88,000 to 139,000 Americans. Of these, 30 to 40% probably died. For the survivors, their lives were changed forever. This range does not depend at all on the data from our Kaiser FDA study. Indeed, Dr. Eric Topol at the Cleveland Clinic recently estimated 160,000 cases in an article that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. So how many people is 100,000? We're talking about many lives, not just numbers. Senator Grassley, 100,000 would represent 5% of the population of the state of Iowa, and it would represent 67% of the citizens of Des Moines. We're talking about many lives. Now imagine that we were talking about jetliners. If there were an average of 150 to 200 people on an aircraft, this range of 88,000 to 139,000 would be the rough equivalent of 500 to 900 aircraft dropping from the sky. This translates to 2 to 4 aircraft every week, week in, week out, for the past 5 years. If you were confronted by this situation, what would your reaction be? What would you want to know, and what would you do about it? And what does history teach us? You can see in the figure that is part of my testimony that in 1938, Congress enacted the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, basically creating the FDA in response to the deaths of about 100 children caused by elixir sulfanilamide. In 1962, Congress enacted the Kefauver-Harris Amendments in response to the thalidomide disaster in Europe, which affected 5,000 to 10,000 infants. Today, in 2004, we are faced with what may be the single greatest drug safety catastrophe in the history of this country. I strongly believe that this should have been, and largely could have been, avoided, but it wasn't, and over 100,000 Americans have paid dearly for this failure. In my opinion, the FDA has let the American people down. Now, why was the question of Vioxx and heart attack important to me? Well, one, Vioxx would undoubtedly be used by millions of people. That's a very large number to expose if there's a serious drug risk. Two, heart attack is a fairly common problem. It's a common event. And given the commonness of the event and the large number of people who'd be using it, even a small increase in the risk due to Vioxx could mean that tens of thousands of Americans might be seriously harmed or killed by the drug. If these 3 factors were present, I knew that we had all the ingredients needed to guarantee a national disaster. The first two factors were established realities. It came down to the third factor, that is, what was the level of risk with Vioxx at both the low and the high dose? I worked with Kaiser Permanente in California to perform a large study which was carefully done and took us nearly 3 years to complete. In early August of this year, we assembled a poster describing some of our findings. We concluded that the high-dose Vioxx significantly increased the risk of heart attacks and sudden deaths, and that the high dose should not be prescribed or used by patients. This is exactly the finding that Vigor had. High dose increases the risk of heart attack. We found the same thing. This conclusion triggered an explosive response from the Office of New Drugs, which approved Vioxx in the first place and was responsible for regulating it post-marketing. The response from senior management in my office, the Office of Drug Safety, was equally stressful. I was pressured to change my conclusions and recommendations. One drug safety manager recommended that I should be barred from presenting the poster at the meeting and also noted that Merck needed to know our study results. So I guess Merck needed to know the results, but the public didn't. An email from the director for the entire Office of New Drugs was revealing. He suggested that since the FDA was not contemplating a warning against the use of high-dose Vioxx, my conclusions should be changed. CDER and the Office of New Drugs have repeatedly expressed the view that the Office of Drug Safety should not reach any conclusions or make any recommendations that would contradict what the Office of New Drugs wants to do or is doing. Even more revealing, a mere 6 weeks before Merck pulled Vioxx from the market, the Center for Drugs, the Office of New Drugs, and the Office of Drug Safety Management did not believe that there was an outstanding safety concern with Vioxx. So while they think that there's nothing going on, 2 to 4 jumbo jetliners are dropping from the sky every week. There were 2 other revelatory milestones. In mid-August, despite our study results showing an increased risk of heart attack with Vioxx, and despite the results of other studies published in the literature, FDA approved Vioxx for use in children with rheumatoid arthritis. Then, on September 22nd, at a meeting attended by senior managers from the Office of New Drugs and the Office of Drug Safety, no one thought that there was a safety issue with Vioxx that needed to be dealt with. At this meeting, the reviewing office director responsible for Vioxx asked why I'd even thought about studying Vioxx and heart attacks in the first place. Because FDA had made its labeling change and nothing more needed to be done. At this meeting, a senior manager from my office labeled our Vioxx study a, in quote, scientific rumor. 8 days later, Merck pulled Vioxx from the market and jetliners stopped dropping from the sky. Finally, we wrote a manuscript for publication in a peer-reviewed medical journal. Senior managers in the Office of Drug Safety have not granted clearance, even though it was accepted for publication after rigorous peer review by that journal. Until it is cleared, our data and conclusions will not see the light of day in the scientific forum they deserve, and serious students of drug safety and drug regulation will be denied the opportunity to consider and openly debate the issues we raise in that paper. My experience with Vioxx is typical of how CDER responds to serious drug safety issues in general. It is similar to what Dr. Mossholder went through earlier this year when he reached his conclusion that most SSRI antidepressants should not be used by children. The Office of New Drugs and the Office of Drug Safety Management together suppressed his report, and he was blocked from presenting at an FDA advisory committee meeting. He was subsequently proven to be right about SSRI risk. There are many other examples where CDER and its Office of New Drugs proved to be extremely resistant to full and open disclosure of safety information, especially when it called into question an existing regulatory position. In these situations, the New Drug Reviewing Division that approved the drug in the first place and that regards it as one might regard their own child typically proves to be the single greatest obstacle to effectively dealing with a serious drug safety issue. The second greatest obstacle is often the senior management within the Office of Drug Safety, who either actively or tacitly go along with what the Office of New Drugs wants. Vioxx is a terrible tragedy and a profound regulatory failure. I would argue that the FDA as currently configured is incapable of protecting America against another Vioxx. We are virtually defenseless. It is important that this committee and the American people understand that what happened with Vioxx is really a symptom of something far more dangerous to the safety of the American people. Simply put, FDA and the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research are broken. The organizational structure within CDER is entirely geared towards the review and approval of new drugs. When a serious safety issue arises post-marketing, the immediate reaction of the reviewing divisions is almost always one of denial, rejection, and heat. They approve the drug, so there can't possibly be anything wrong with it. The same group that approved the drug is also responsible for taking regulatory action against it. This is an inherent conflict of interest. At the same time, the Office of Drug Safety has no regulatory power and must first convince the new Drug Reviewing Division that a problem exists before anything beneficial can be done to help the public. Often, the new Drug Reviewing Division is the single greatest obstacle to protecting the public against safety risks. And a close second, in my opinion, is an Office of Drug Safety Management that sees its mission as pleasing the Office of New Drugs. The corporate culture within CDER is also a barrier to effectively protecting the American people from unnecessary harm due to prescription and over-the-counter drugs. The culture is dominated by a worldview that believes only randomized clinical trials provide useful and actionable information, and that post-marketing safety is an afterthought. This culture views the pharmaceutical industry it is supposed to regulate as its client. It overvalues the benefits of the drugs it approves, and it seriously undervalues, disregards, and disrespects drug safety. Finally, the scientific standards CDER applies to drug safety guarantee that unsafe and deadly drugs will remain on the U.S. market. When it comes to safety, the Office of New Drugs paradigm of 95% certainty prevails. Under this paradigm, a drug is safe until you can show that with 95% or greater certainty, it is not safe. That is an incredibly high, almost insurmountable barrier to overcome. It's the equivalent of beyond a shadow of a doubt. And here's an added kicker. In order to demonstrate a safety problem with 95% certainty, extremely large studies would be needed. And guess what? Those studies usually aren't done or they can't be done. If the weatherman says there's an 80% chance of rain, most people would bring an umbrella. Using CDER's standard, you wouldn't bring an umbrella until the weatherman said there's a 95% or greater chance. And I have a second analogy. Imagine that you have a pistol with a barrel having 100 chambers. Now randomly place 95 bullets into those chambers. The gun represents a drug, and the bullets represent the probability, the certainty of a serious drug safety problem. Using CDER's standard, only when you have 95 bullets or more in the gun would CDER conclude that the gun is loaded, that is, that there's a drug safety problem with that drug. Now remove 5 bullets from the chamber. Now we only have 90 bullets. Because there is only a 90% chance that when I pull the trigger, a bullet will fire, CDER would conclude that the gun is not loaded. That is, the drug is safe. A more rational and patient protective standard is required when dealing with safety. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Graham.